This Hangout on Air is live. We had at least one memorable play tonight. If you did tune in for this game, Cecil Lammey on assignment, actually on his way to the Army-Navy game in Philadelphia, and we got Matt Waldman, who may have to step out to apply to comply with hotel policies, and Dr. Gene Bramall, week 14. It all counts. It's all do or die. It's the decisions that you rue for the rest of your life, or the decisions that you feel like were divine inspiration to take you to a championship. Maybe this hasn't been a game full of divine inspiration so far, Matt, but what do you think of what we've seen so far?
Well, I mean, it's been fun to watch Derrick Henry have, one of the longest runs in NFL history, or tie for that. I mean, he used that stiff arm about 3 different times. That was great. Then, of course, Cameron Batson with the muffed punt, and then committing a safety. And you've seen Kody Kessler do some nice things to a degree with his limited arm strength. But James O'Shaughnessy dropped a key pass in the middle of the field it was a really difficult throw that he made. It was right on the money. And Dede Westbrook seems to be the only one who seems to be consistent about being able to get open, find an opening, and be on the same page and catch the football. So, as a result, now you're looking at the Titans. They're up 16-2, and it's just one of those games that it just looks like it's going to be kind of like it's going to stay this way probably for the rest of the game. I have a feeling.
Yeah, we're going to get some more Derrick Henry throwing guys around. And as you said, Kody Kessler on his way to a nice lucrative career as a backup quarterback, looking like a backup quarterback, but with some things to build around. Not any big mistakes, a few errant throws, some good throws on the move, some good ball placement on some of those throws.
He did that at USC all the time. It was very good at that.
And Dante Moncrief showing the maddening inconsistency, which has kept him from capitalizing on the great physical gifts that he has. As you said, the toughness from Dede Westbrook. Leonard Fournette, this was I doubt very many people have players in this game in their playoff matchup. And I don't know how many Leonard Fournette teams made the playoffs, but Leonard Fournette getting shut down here, and not a good game script for him. And Marcus Mariota with the worst throw of the night on his interception. But it's Derrick Henry's night. And on Thursday night, it's always a Dr. Gene night. And Dr. Gene, we need you. Instead of giving you a specific question to start, I'm going to give you a more open-ended question and say, who are you most worried about for Week 14 as of right now?
T.Y. Hilton, I think is where I am.
I don't like that.
Just because I haven't seen enough. Usually you'll see one of the beat writers say something, and Stephen Holder did say something today that said he just can't see T.Y. Hilton not playing, but it's a shoulder injury. We've seen him not practice and return on Friday. We really need to see that. I would hate to see a DNP for Hilton tomorrow. He's one that, as I went through the list today, had me nervous. I'm not as concerned about Joe Mixon today as I was yesterday. Now that the fact he's back to limited practice, my concern there was there an injury that happened during practice yesterday, and we're going to see a DNP, and then some big concern. I heard good things about Michael Thomas. Julio Jones didn't practice. I'm sure we'll talk about all these guys, but the one that made me the most nervous was Hilton today.
Gene, not that a lot of people are really, jumping at the gun to try and start him, but Matthew Stafford with his back injury, and talk a little bit about whether you think he will play, and then also, do you think any of this stuff stems from the hit that he took against the Jets in the opener on Monday night?
Yeah, I don't know whether or not it goes back that far or not. We're not really sure. I haven't seen any, and we never do with Detroit, get much indication about what the specifics of an injury is. So I don't know whether this is relatively simple back spasms alone, or whether or not whatever is going on is related to a little bit of a longer term situation. Stafford plays through just about everything, so I don't expect anything different this week. Haven't heard anything that suggests he's not going to play. He plays through every single thing. So I think that's going to be the case. We have to watch and see what the team says about him on Friday and make sure there's nothing concerning in the overnight note Saturday and the Sunday, but I think you can expect him to play.
Gene, the question about Cam Newton isn't whether he's going to play, but he's going to play, but rarely can you see a player's injury so materially affect their game as you saw him at Tampa last week. And we're already hearing now that he might have to have another shoulder surgery. concerns that pop into my head are, well, another game where he has some errant passes that turn into interceptions, and maybe less of a willingness to run because he could take a hit on that shoulder. What do you advise folks who have to make a decision about Cam Newton this week?
Yeah, I hope for the best. I think there's a wider range of expectation. I don't think we're going to see him leave the game. I don't think you're going to see him run less. But if he can't make 30, 40-yard passes, then that limits some of the upside that he has. And again, we've seen Christian McCaffrey be very successful and Curtis Samuel be very successful, and they're assimilating that offense with Newton's lack of accuracy downfield in mind. But there's definitely some concern here. If you have to come off the field because you can't throw 40, 45-yard Hail Marys, that's a worry. When the longer your pass is, the worse the accuracy is. Teams are going to see that and eventually take advantage of it. And this really isn't new. This has been going on for, most of this year and last year as well. Not where you've seen, but it crops up where, you see him missing practice time, and it's clear that he's not comfortable. And it was a partial rotator cuff situation that he had taken care of. It's not clear whether or not it's a recurrence of that or something else that's going on. But I almost feel like I'd be looking at other options if you have them. There's lots of good quarterback options out there this week. Not that the upside still isn't there with his rushing ability as well, but we've seen what we've seen out of him in the last 2 weeks has not been good.
Let's travel to Houston and talk about the pair of wide receivers we have there. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins with his foot. And then I saw you add QT last night when Bob dropped him in our Fessalo G League, and I was kind of laughing because I almost picked him up myself and decided, he's probably banged up a little bit. And then I saw you pick him up. So tell us a little bit about why you added him, and then also what's his status as well as Hopkins.
I will add any player during the playoff weeks that I think has a chance at a ceiling type game. And we've seen that from QT. Demaryius Thomas is there now. But Deshaun Watson and that offense with these next 3 games coming up, there's some pretty favorable matchups. It may not pay off. I may never use QT, but he's a guy that might get 8 to 10 targets out of the slot, has the potential to break some longer runs, and that offense is humming well enough now that there's always the chance at a couple of red zone targets. So not expecting too much there, but just the status of my team and the upside there made more sense than I dropped Greg Olsen for him. So it wasn't too much of a difficult decision to be made there. I think we are at the same place this week that we were with the Texans last week. Hopkins is on the injury report, as he often is during the regular season, without really any concern at all that he's not going to play. It's the foot that he's always listed with. That's the case again. He's limited in practice, which is always the case. It'll be shocking to see him anything other than limited on Friday, not listed on the game status report and playing like he always does. Kuti was still not really sure where things stand. He told reporters, as did Bill O'Brien, that it's kind of a frustrating situation for him. And we've heard, this has been since, halfway through the preseason that they've been dealing with these things with Kuti, one hamstring or the other, and then multiple aggravations. So Kuti has told us that he's not really going to play unless he feels 100%. We have seen him limited on Fridays and then not listed on the game status report. I think that's what you'll have to see to think of him as anything other than a game time decision. But I think we're trending the same way we trended last week, which is we'll probably hear that the Texans want to see what he looks like on Sunday morning, and then they'll make a decision from there.
Gene, a lot of people rode James Conner to the playoffs, including 2 of my teams. Is he going to help us at all in the playoffs?
I hope so, although you have to be concerned that they ruled him out so early this week. We went from hearing it was a contusion and not a major situation from what Tomlin and Ian Rappaport were telling us to Tuesday morning he shows up and he's banged up so much to the point where they've already decided he can't play 5 days from that time, and knowing that it looked on video like it was a high ankle sprain, now that we're hearing that additional imaging studies said ankle sprain, you hope that there wasn't something on the imaging test and then some additional swelling and stiffness that made him think that it's going to be more of a 3 to 4 week injury than a 1 to 2 week situation. We've seen lots of players this year not practice and then return to a full practice the following Wednesday and play. And you hope that's the case with Connor, but the tone of that report being so different within 12 to 24 hours from Monday to Tuesday really raises the suspicions that this could linger into another couple of weeks as well.
Gene, let's move over to Cleveland. And they have a pretty good matchup against the Carolina Panthers defense in terms of their tight end play. But David Njoku's been limited for both practices with the knee injury. How do you feel about where that's going to head?
I think we're probably still okay there. The last couple of weeks when this has happened, Njoku came back to a full practice on Friday. I think the Browns will list him questionable sometimes, but there's not much concern that he won't be able to play. His snap count and percentage has dropped a little bit over the past couple of weeks. His targets are subject to the vagaries of whatever's going on offensively. If they're trying to get Nick Chubb going and doing a lot of rushing targets and touches versus how they're attacking through the air and how Baker Mayfield is playing, I think he's going to play. I think you've got that generally wide range of expectations where you could get 3 to 5 targets, or you could definitely get some more, including some red zone situations. But I don't have a lot of concern that this lingering injury is going to limit him any more than it has over the past month.
Gene, a lot of things pointing in the wrong direction for Kenny Golladay. One, that last week he didn't really have much of a game against the Rams. 2, that he might see a lot of Patrick Peterson, at least when he's not in the slot this week. And he's limited on the injury report in practice the first 2 this week. What are we looking for tomorrow to hopefully make us feel better? And how, of all these concerns about Golladay, how big should his physical condition be?
I don't know. We just get very little from Detroit about injuries. We're getting a little bit about Kerryon Johnson this week, but in general, we just don't know what's going on. I'm not too concerned because he's been limited in practice, and those players that are limited in practice in Detroit generally play. He didn't look too limited last week. I think we heard from multiple reporters that the Rams' game plan was to shut down Kenny Golladay and see if anybody out there in Detroit could beat him, and it was successful. There were a couple of plays late in the game where he rose up, almost had a catch in the back of the end zone where he didn't look too limited vertically or laterally. So hopefully that proves to be the case. It'd be great to see him not listed on the injury report at all after Friday's practice. It would be really nice to have somebody from the team or Golladay himself say, we're just resting a little bit. I feel pretty good. I don't expect to have any difficulty. And then it comes down to how we think the matchup is going to go this week. But for right now, I'm fairly confident that it's not a significant injury situation, but Friday's practice participation is going to be important.
Gene, let's move over to a little dynasty talk and look at 2 players who are now going to be coming off of Achilles injuries. One in Dante Foreman, who was made active, and he's practiced in full the past 2 days. We could give a little redraft slant and say, is he going to somehow surprise in the playoffs? But more likely want to know about his outlook long term, as well as Emmanuel Sanders, who fantastically underrated receiver. Is this the end for his career? Is this are we looking at, Michael Crabtree being a good example of what could happen for him?
Yeah, there's a long track record of wide receivers, both young and veteran, who recover from either partial or full Achilles tears and be productive. It's a tough thing to do. It's going to be a long recovery period. It might be right up against training camp next year. We may see him start on the PUP list. You're usually looking at closer to 9 months, and that's going to put him into September for sure. So it's not going to be an easy thing for him to do. The timing is a little bit unfortunate in lots of different ways, both for Denver now, Sanders now, and in the future. But I don't think that we can put it past him that he won't be able to recover. You mentioned Michael Crabtree, and there are other players in that kind of same age range that have been successful. And Sanders has the type of game where you think that he could probably pull that off. Foreman is a different situation, as we've talked about lots of times. The sample sizes are small and what have you, but there has not been a running back that's been successful over any period of time really at all. Arian Foster is probably the best example of someone that came back after an Achilles tear and looked pretty close to their pre-injury form. But it lasted only 3 or 4 games before another soft tissue injury came up and got him. So there was some hint of whether Foreman was either, and it really shouldn't have been too much of a conditioning issue, whether there was maybe a little bit of a setback, maybe some other soft tissue stuff, maybe it was a compensatory injury, but there was some thought that he'd be back for the Jaguars game back in week 7. And here we are pushing week 14, and it's going to be his first week on the active roster. And there's no guarantee with how that depth chart looks right now that he's going to play, much less be effective. So he's going to be a very important data point. He is arguably the most talented back in the last 5 to 8 years that has had this injury. We had Cadillac Williams and a few other guys that were pretty good players decades ago go through this. Decades ago now, it seems crazy to say, even though it's the truth, right? That's true. I was teasing my 11-year-old today. I said, "You're in your second decade of life," and he's like, "No." And he's 11. I said, "Well, count it up a little bit," but that's what it seems like now. It's just time is getting away from us so quickly. So Foreman's going to be a really important data point. I hope that we see him. I don't think he's going to be a difference maker necessarily for fantasy lineups unless something happens with Lamar Miller. But it would be really nice to see him get 3 to 5 targets and touches over the next couple of weeks and look productive with them, and then hear nothing but positive things through the offseason.
And the fantasy gods, the cruel, cruel fantasy gods, trolling everybody who took Derrick Henry, what, 4th round? Maybe even 3rd round? And he was nowhere near your lineup. And although this had been a game, a matchup that he had had some success against in the past, the trend said you're benching him. And now he's up to 3 touchdowns. And this game, Gene, has basically lived down to expectations. Next week on Thursday night, we have a game that hopefully lives up to expectations between the Chiefs and the Chargers. And for everybody who took Melvin Gordon in the 1st round, will the fantasy gods be cruel or will they show some kindness?
Yeah, I don't know. I was really hoping. So Adam Schefter's report on Sunday that suggested that he was more day-to-day than week-to-week, and they didn't see this as a longer-term injury, was really reassuring. And I think probably from the moment that it happened, the Chargers were hoping that they'd get him back for that Thursday night game, very important divisional game, chasing divisional titles and potentially buys and all that sort of stuff as well. Unfortunately, I would feel a lot more confident about that being the case if he was back to practice. So we don't hear much from Los Angeles. The beat writers there are still getting to know the team a little bit. There's not a lot of information that comes out, so we don't really know if he's sprinting and running hard in rehab or if he's not doing much at all. But in order for him to come back a week from now, you really would have liked to see him start to do some conditioning stuff, start to do some individual drills so that they can trust him running and cutting at speed next week. And that's the only thing we've heard, is that Anthony Lynn said we want him at full strength cutting before we clear him to play. And if he doesn't show that he's able to do that, that's going to be a problem. And they're working on a short week, so I'm probably not going to do much on Saturday. You won't see them do too much on Sunday. So next Monday really is the first opportunity for him to show anything. He did tell us on Monday that he still felt a little bit sore. So, there's plenty of time yet for him to recover, but he's got to feel good, and then he's got to prove himself capable of moving before they put him in that game next week. And I would still consider it questionable at best, but if it's close, I think they're going to let him play, whereas at other times during the year and with other players, they may have said, well, let's give you another week to recover. They may see this as important enough that if they can pull into a tie with the Chiefs in these next couple of weeks, that it's a big situation, and they may risk, maybe not bringing him back in a 20-touch capacity where they do let him rotate with the rest of the folks on the depth chart there in certain moments. But limited practice Friday would be really good. A positive note on Monday would be even better.
So what's going on with Robbie Anderson? I mean, certainly Buffalo's a pretty good defense in terms of how they may match up against the Jets. But if you have to play some Jets, and that's one guy who might be your hope for a big play, and he was limited today after a full practice the day before.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the concern. Are they aware that his ankle is just not going to be really right for the rest of the year, and we've got to manage his repetitions? And if that is testing him on Wednesday and then letting him rest to the rest of the week, and then we'll get from him as best as we can get from him on Sundays, that's one thing. And we'll probably know tomorrow if the opposite has happened, where he had a little bit of setback in practice and didn't feel good after Wednesday's practice, and then we're at a much different place now than where we've been over the past couple of weeks. I don't think Anderson was on the game status report last week by the end of the week, if I'm remembering correctly. So that ankle is not healthy, but it's something that he's been able to play through over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and tomorrow is going to give us an indication of which side he's going to fall on.
The Audible live Thursday night, week 14, keeping you entertained while the Jacksonville's offense might entertain us in a more amusing way, with Dr. Gene Bramwell going around the horn once or twice more on some injury notes around the league. Gene, Xavier Howard has been a bright spot for the Miami defense and a dark spot when one of your wide receivers is facing him. But should Josh Gordon teams worry about him this week? And next week, Stephon Diggs, what do we see in Xavier Howard's near future?
Yeah, I don't think he's playing this week. We don't usually. One of the code words now for a multiple week injury is coaches call him week to week rather than day to day. So I don't think he's going to play. As far as next week goes, with it being called a week to week injury, I think Wednesday's practice participation next week is going to tell us. If he's still not practicing next Wednesday, then this has the look of a 2 to 4 week situation rather than a 1 to 2 week situation. It's not really been reported exactly what his knee injury is, but when Adam Gase calls it week to week, I think you can expect him to be inactive this week and then hope for the best after that.
So speaking of disappearing and reappearing acts in fantasy football, we just watched Keelan Cole catch a huge deep ball from Kody Kessler up the left sideline in tight coverage in ways that, you're like, oh, was it? Wait a minute, was that the New England Patriots game that we saw like back in week 2? So speaking of which, let's take a look at New Orleans. Again, we're looking at their offensive line. The Cowboys were able to stop that running game pretty well. Teron Armstead with the pec, Ryan Ramczyk with the shoulder. How do you feel about each of those guys? Do you think that that's going to, majorly impact how the Saints can match up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Yeah, I think Ramczyk is probably going to play, and there was lots of optimism around Armstead yesterday after practice, and he was back to a limited practice today. So the pec injury is tough. He's been trying to get back on the field. They were really happy to get him back at practice on Wednesday. Armstead really wants to play. I think if he doesn't have too much in the way of soreness after he ramps up his activity and his individual drills a little bit, I think he'll go. And even a limited set of tackles there is going to be a big thing for New Orleans. So cross your fingers that both of them will be able to go. I've got Ramczyk handicapped as expected to play, and I think Armstead is trending that way too.
And Kody Kessler is seeing why sometimes it isn't so great to get that backup quarterback paycheck and wondering, how did I end up here? Getting absolutely under the tidal wave of Jurrell Casey is after that play. The Titans slow him down. One more round here, Doc, and we'll let you go back to your life and away from football somehow pulling us in. What have we done with our lives that we're watching the Jags and the Texans on a perfectly good Thursday night? I want to ask you a question, a general question that we have a specific jumping off point. The jumping off point is Landon Collins, and he's been playing through shoulder injury, and the Giants have decided to shut him down. Do you expect we're going to see more of that? Deshaun Jackson is another player that we may see shut down. Do you expect we're going to see more of that? Is there anybody that comes to mind when I talk about this that you're saying, well, we're watching them, or maybe they're playing through the injury now, their team might decide to shut them down in the next few weeks as the optics on players playing through injuries start to change, who might be in a precarious spot?
Yeah, I don't know that there's anybody moving in that direction necessarily. We're seeing the Niners this week sit down Matt Breida, but I don't think his season is close to being over. I don't expect that to be the case with too many other players. I think that the main reason for players to shut it down now is to move toward a surgical procedure so that they're able to get back a little bit sooner next year. So the idea is if there's really no decision other than surgery, if you can play through the injury without having a lot of potential setbacks or making an injury worse or having a compensatory situation that's going to really wreck your off season, then you try to get through the end of the season and have the procedure as early as possible, or rehab and take it right up to the last possible minute. But if you know there's something that needs to be taken care of, as much as they like to play, it probably makes more sense to rehab and build up strength and whatever else they may need from a rehab perspective sooner than later. And we see that all the time. I think there were more players that went on IR this week from a starter perspective who'd been dealing with injuries than I had seen in quite some time. So I mean, just scrolling through here, we saw AJ Green, Emmanuel Sanders. Some of these guys had acute injuries that weren't going to be the case, but players that are put on injured reserve in the middle of the week, and Landon Collins and Kevin King falls into that category too. And there may be more before the end of the week, depending on how some of these players recover. Maybe one of the Indy tight ends or something like that may end up moving in that direction. So yeah, I don't know if it's going to be this week. More likely as we get to week 16 and 17, you're going to see a player maybe skip 1 or 2 games rather than 3 to 4. But we're definitely getting to that time of year.
Well, you mentioned the Jurrell Casey tidal wave, and there was a player earlier this year I saw a tsunami hit Jurrell Casey head on and knock him on his back.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if the Marshawn Lynch tsunami is actually going to play again. Will he be back next year somewhere? And are we watching another Derrick Henry long run for a touchdown? Oh my, 4 touchdowns for Derrick Henry. He's having a season right now.
Well, whatever you thought about the Jaguars defense last week against Indianapolis, shutting them out, I think we can pretty much forget about that today. This is not good. If somebody will have Marshawn Lynch and he is not interested in re-retiring, then I think he's absolutely shown in the last year or so that he can be effective enough to play. The return of the veteran running back between Adrian Peterson and Marshawn Lynch or otherwise, I don't think his injury is going to prevent him from playing. I think if he was close at all, the Ravens might have brought him back, but with them choosing to go elsewhere with Donald Penn today, they just don't have any other options to bring him back. So hopefully we'll see him back. It would be great if that was the case, and I think he'll be healthy enough to do it if he wants to.
Dr. Gene, always your presence, your aura, and your information help guide us.
I have an aura.
And I want someone to isolate that sound you make when you're in the middle of a pause and you're like, ugh. That's like the feeling we all feel sometimes when we're going to set our lineups and we're not quite sure what to do.
That's just my brain rebooting. I don't think there's no aura about that. That's just the clunking in my head, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it's perfect.
Like a pre-core elliptical machine.
It captures it perfectly. And before I let you go, Gene, I want to tell the listeners, the viewers again this story. And in our Fessel OG league, some of the graybeards of footballguys.com and Adam Harstad, who's having a really good season. There was a log jam for playoff spots, and the last 3 playoff spots went to the 3 of us here. And the one who's not here, Cecil Lammy, I was actually in position, I think, to knock you out of the playoffs, Gene. I don't know if it was me or you. One of the two of us.
Well, it was stupid Bob Henry that did it. It's his fault.
Yeah.
In the position I was, but I think he got 150 points from Travis Kelce last week and 2 from the rest of his team. I think that's what happened.
And poor Cecil, because he played the Steelers defense, and because in our scoring system you can get negative points for a defense.
Is that what happened?
He went from in the playoffs to out of the playoffs by 0.5 points. Yeah. But the good news is that all 3 of us are in the playoffs, and may you, Dr. Gene, meet one of the 2 of us who are playing each other in the wild card round.
Are we actually playing each other to play Gene?
Because
I've got to play Bob again. So
yeah.
So we need to play Hazley.
Bob and I go back about
Hazley.
20.
Yeah, so it's fun, but yeah, of all the bad beat stories, but hopefully, all of your teams advance, but especially
they did. Can you believe that? 7 playoff teams. This is crazy. We were laughing about this on Sunday, but
yeah,
some of them snuck in as the 6th seed, but
hey,
hope springs eternal.
It always
you just should name all your teams. It just doesn't matter.
It's probably true. It's absolutely true.
Well, it does matter that you give us all this wonderful wisdom every Sunday, every Thursday, and all kinds of other ways at Football Guys. Thank you, Doctor.
Indeed. Next week, Sunday, we'll see you guys.
Yeah.
Yep.
Enjoy the rest of this game.
The Derrick
Henry looks so excited, man.
The exhibition. Well, and from a fantasy perspective, and what is important about this is it does highlight, and for some people draft conservatively and think like, I just want to make the playoffs, and you just get to the playoffs, and everybody, I've been calling it, Matt, a marathon through a minefield.
Right.
And maybe you stepped on a mine last week. I mean, I've got one team missing AJ Green and James Conner. I've got another one missing Gordon and Conner. Got another one that's missing Kareem Hunt. And you might have looked at your lineup. You said, well, I lost Kareem Hunt. Now I have to play Derrick Henry. That's all I've got. And that's why getting to the playoffs is important.
Yeah, it's a new season.
Yeah.
And it's just like the NFL. The NFL playoffs are a new season. And that's what makes fantasy football great, is that it really does model after the NFL in that way. Because every year, that's why we do articles the way we do, like in week 8, week 9, week 10, about, this guy who's on the bench who hasn't played all year, or he's a fullback. Remember Marcel Reese? Do you remember, things like that? Yeah, and people go, I'm never going to start him. You're in the playoffs. You're never going to do that. Well, yeah, you might. And these are guys that you might want to be considering picking up. And then, and then also, if you're fortunate enough, you were like, I'm stuck playing Derrick Henry, which is like, what a thing to be stuck with right now.
Wow.
He looks like one of those dogs who gets to look out the window when he was running up the sideline. His eyes were wide.
Oh.
Yeah.
He caught the car.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is the biggest running back game of the year, but if it's not, I'm pretty sure it's close. And we, of course,
I mean, he's close to what Chubb did. I mean, it's got to be at this point because 99. I mean, that was
he's well over 200 yards and
yeah,
4 touchdowns. And wow,
that's got to be it. Yeah.
So as you're pouring over your lineups, making these kind of decisions, forced to play players you didn't really want to play, remember Derrick Henry. Let's talk about some of those guys, and we may touch on some of these subjects again on Sunday. So for those of you that like to tune in on Thursday and Sunday, I apologize if we go over this ground twice, but I like to give this stuff to people live because on that theme, Matt, let's talk about some of the running backs that you did not expect to rely on, that you might rely on, or that you might be weighing against running backs that have been disappointing you, and you think, well, yeah, I could play Marlon Mack again and be disappointed. or let's step through these guys. Let's start with my favorite, and I've got to say I'm fixated on Jalen Samuels this week, and I feel like he was the one. There was a lot of debate of who to pick up on the waiver wire. I thought he was the one on the waiver wire this week. I don't care what the coaches are saying. I know, okay, Stephon Ridley's going to get half the touches, or at least they plan on him getting half the touches. Jalen Samuels is a better running back than him. He's going to get all of the work out of the backfield as a receiver. He's an excellent receiver, one of the best receiving running backs in the league. I mean, when I say one of the best, what I mean is in that top 20 or 25, or just has a high acumen as a receiver. That's why he has tight end eligibility in Yahoo. Just really quick as an aside, too. Do you have any problem with the idea that people in Yahoo leagues can play Jalen Samuels as a tight end this week?
No, because I mean, if that's how everyone gets to do it, so I mean,
yeah,
it's not like you're playing Yahoo leagues versus my fantasy league. I mean,
right.
It's not like it's not like that. So if you're not savvy enough to consider that as a possible option and pick that up, that's your own fault. That's not anything else. So
thank you.
I mean, I'm good with it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, and I even had a question on Twitter a few weeks ago, Matt, where someone said, should I prioritize Jalen Samuels above all the other backup running backs in my Yahoo league because he also has tight end eligibility? And I said, sounds like a good reason to do that to me.
Ding, ding, ding.
So, and also we have the Steelers backfield as such a fertile soil to grow fantasy value over, I mean, how many years now, going back to like Willie Parker, Jerome Bettis, and this matchup at Oakland. I feel like Jalen Samuels is one that when we watched James Conner go down, it might have been an instant knee-jerk reaction. He scored a touchdown in like less than half a quarter, basically. And you think this is going to be a big pickup. Then we hear this stuff about Stephon Ridley, and we say, oh, people are saying, oh, I don't know. Maybe pick up Jeff Wilson over him. Maybe he's not an automatic play this week. He's still an automatic play for me. Is he an automatic play for you? And what more can you add from your RSP file for folks that have to make a decision about Samuels this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think Samuels is a competent running back. He has good enough quickness to be able to get around the edge. So with a team like the Steelers who block the edge pretty well, he's going to function fine. He is a good outlet receiver out of the backfield, and that's exactly how he's going to be used as an outlet receiver. He's got good footwork. He's not the most powerful guy. I think he doesn't run through arm tackles as well as he should, doesn't get his feet up as well as he should in some of these situations, but he's a competent player on a team that has a really good supporting cast, and so that's good. The issue with Ridley is the big thing with him is that, yeah, he could disappoint you and end up with 17 touches for 80 yards, and Samuels ends up getting like 40, and then another 20 in receiving, and you'll be upset about it. But Ridley's the most likely running back in the league to fumble and then be put on the bench. I mean,
which already happened once this year.
Yes, it already did. He came in once and he fumbled it away. It's like in his head ever since New England. I mean, he basically had a career in front of him in New England, and he fumbled it away. And so it's going to be one of those things that are you really going to bet on Ridley when the odds are likely that this whole fumbling thing is still in his head? So I like him. But I would say, Jeffrey Wilson is probably the guy that I would prefer in this particular situation, just because the Steelers are interesting. We know that they play down to their opponents at times, and the Raiders didn't play too badly last week in terms of their offense, as slapdash as that offense was put together to be. So I could see how a situation winds up where they're not pounding the ball very much, but and then they're also being able to kind of have more of a shootout, an old-fashioned Raiders-Steelers type of shootout.
Well, you mentioned Jeffrey Wilson. Expound on him from the Mean Green. Actually,
Yeah,
Mean Joe Green, up in Denton, a great music school too, one of the
yeah,
best music
absolutely. A
schools.
lot of my friends a lot of my friends went to the University of North Texas, which I affectionately have called North Texas State on Twitter and ticked off pretty much everybody who's a North Texas alum who says that hasn't been that long since it's been long. It's been the new name longer than it's been that old name. So I've been kind of thinking about trolling them and just calling them North Texas State for the rest of the time I'm on Twitter and just keep saying sorry, I forgot. But yeah, Jeffrey Wilson. Jeffrey Wilson is a very intelligent football player who you could see this year as we watched D.D. Westbrook just barely miss a touchdown here. But Jeffrey Wilson's a guy who puts things together well. He has what I would call the it factor. He's someone who understands, basically that there are situations that you don't really practice, but he's technically sound enough to be able to figure out on the fly how to make the most of that situation. He's a good receiver out of the backfield. He has decent cutback ability, even though a lot of times he'll hit the line, straight line, and just kind of push forward. He doesn't have amazing power. He doesn't have amazing speed. But he's one of those guys that is just a intelligent football player who understands how to play his position. And when you put him in a situation like the one that we saw last week in San Francisco, he's going to be able to gain yardage off of that. I'm trying to think. Alex Collins is probably the high end of what Jeffrey Wilson is. Spencer Ware is the high end of what Jeffrey Wilson is. Peyton Barber is on the high end of what Jeffrey Wilson is. So he's a guy who's very capable as long as he has a decent line and enough opportunities.
Which he should have. Although I'm excited to see Matthew Days get hopefully some work in this game. I'm surprised he didn't get more last week. And I think that he could show out as well as Wilson did on his touches. But there's another running back. There's another running back this week that wasn't as hot of a waiver wire pickup, and it very easily could have been you're looking at what you have left in your wallet, and well, I can't afford Samuels. I'm not going to get Wilson. But there was another running back last week, and Matt, you and I have worked together for so long, and we've exchanged, cross-pollinated so many ideas. And really, I know when I'm watching games and I'm watching players, I feel almost a telepathic connection, or like that I can see the smile.
Yeah,
I can see your eyes kind of soften when you watch a play and you see things that you tell people. Well, what did you think he was going to do? That's what I told you he did and can do. And it's not like you're taking credit for it. You're just saying I watched Justin Jackson. That looks like the Justin Jackson that I was excited about. Could it be, even if Justin Jackson, and what's interesting to me about this, and we can talk about projecting or forecasting workloads here, because it really was Austin Ekeler's show last week, and just like it was in London when Melvin Gordon couldn't play, it was Austin Ekeler's show. Justin Jackson only got in on 14 snaps last week, but he was part of the decisive margin between the Steelers and the Chargers in that game. And he didn't just do it because of good blocking or a defensive breakdown. And it wasn't just on one play or two plays. It was most plays. Did the Chargers go back to the drawing board and say, well, maybe this should be a committee this week? And then you look at the matchup against the Bengals and you think, well, geez, half of the work against the Bengals and the Chargers offense is worth more than 80% of the work in the Niners offense against the Broncos, or half of the work against the Raiders and the Steelers offense, or maybe even more, because if we do expect the Chargers to bury the Bengals, this has been a Chargers team that, as the season has gone on, seem to be doing a better job beating the teams they're supposed to beat and beating them decisively. Could it be that because you only had a few dollars left and you settled for Justin Jackson, that you got, at least for week 14, the best waiver wire running back?
I only had $1 left in our league, and I couldn't believe I got him. Yeah. So I was sitting there thinking, okay, that's great. But the reason I feel that way is that when you look at Austin Ekeler, he's a good football player. He's not a top talent. He is basically a passing down scat back who can function as a runner if you really need him to between the tackles. But he's not that guy. Justin Jackson has more of a chance to be the guy or the lead back in terms of talent and what he can do, because he's more creative. He makes people miss better. He's got better vision. He's someone that can turn bad situations into manageable situations behind the line of scrimmage in ways that Austin Ekeler doesn't. Ekeler's a one-cut guy with some burst who can catch the ball and get under defenders. Justin Jackson can eliminate angles and turn, a 3-yard loss into a 15-yard gain, and he can also catch. So when you look at this situation, the hope is I picked up Jackson in a lot of leagues with the hope of, well, let's see if Melvin Gordon hurt, Austin Ekeler is going to play the Gordon role, Justin Jackson's going to play the Ekeler role. That's my hope, was that it would be kind of like that. And that's what happened. And it wasn't like Ekeler was bad last week. It wasn't like he was struggling and went in. It was just kind of more like, and I'm exaggerating it a little bit here, but it's kind of like having Charcandrick West as your starter, and then you bring in Jamal Charles. And Jamal Charles comes in, and suddenly you go, Charcandrick West didn't do anything wrong. He's an okay back. He can play in the NFL. But Jamal Charles, oh, wait a minute. Maybe we need to do something a little more with this. And I thought the commentary this week from Lynn, Coach Lynn, was very telling, because what he did was he said, Austin Ekeler has been worn down a little bit. He's a little worn down. He's played special teams all year, and he's playing in this role in the offense. And he's a little worn down. We're going to give Justin Jackson some more carries, most likely. That's what we want to be able to do. What that tells me, I think that's coach speak for, we want to give the ball to Justin Jackson more, but we don't want to be at the cost of Austin Ekeler's confidence that we're going to do this, because we may need Ekeler if Jackson messes up. And we may need him to play really well. And we also don't know exactly what we have in Jackson. I mean, we think we do, because all the teammates are saying we see him do this every week in against the scout team, and he plays really well. But they always say it's nice to see under the lights, because everybody knows that when you play under the lights, that's where it counts. And I think that Ekeler did enough of that they're taking that next cautious step, which is we're going to give him more time this week. And if he really balls out, like if he gets hot, we're going to keep riding him. And next thing we know, Austin Ekeler's in his old role. And then the Melvin Gordon role is going to go to Justin Jackson. And if Justin Jackson keeps playing well, I could see how they say, you know what, Melvin Gordon, why don't you sit on the bench for a little bit until the playoffs, or until we really need you at a moment where this is a critical game, because Jackson's playing great and we can rest you up a little bit and you can be fresh for January. So I think this is a situation where I'm really toying with starting him, especially in leagues where I'm hurt or banged up, or I've got players like we're in a 2-quarterback league and I have Case Keenum opposite, Patrick Mahomes. Like Case Keenum without Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at that. I'm going, yeah, maybe Justin Jackson might be the play here this week, against a bad defense, and give it a shot. So it's worked out, a little bit of luck and a little bit of skill in terms of that, in terms of how Justin Jackson's coming to the forefront.
I'd play him over Adrian Peterson if I were you, but I know that you probably don't have it in you.
You tried to recommend it against Peterson last week. I'm not listening to you.
I know he had a 90-yard run. I know.
That was all it needed. That's all he had.
Yeah, I know the longest run of his career at this point, and well, we'll see. I've got the Giants defense in a few of my playoff matchups too. We got 15 minutes, and again, we're going to be back, folks, Sunday morning, and we will talk a lot more specifically about different matchups, different things. Dr. Gene refreshing us on some injury questions. But since this is our, Matt, I actually, we haven't done a couch session this year, partially because we each have things going on in our lives, so making them more time crunches, but also because we've gotten, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 chances to have the second half of the Thursday night show to go off on some of these topics. And so I want to go off on a topic with you, an open-ended topic, because what I'm doing now with the last 4 weeks of buy low, sell high, I do one of my favorite things to do. It's a consolation when your dynasty team gets knocked out of the playoffs or misses the playoffs, that you can streamline your roster with an eye towards the future. And I like to classify players into snorkel level and scuba level and submarine level, depending on the depth of leagues you're in. And I hope you're in some leagues. You know, you're one of us when you're in those 16-team, 53-man roster, full IDP lineups, and you're looking at even players on the practice squad right now. I was actually very happy to see that the Steelers signed Ralph Webb to the practice squad this week. May he take Stephon Ridley's roster spot at some point. But as I'm describing this topic, so I do one position each week. I did quarterbacks last week. I did running backs this week. I do wide receivers and then tight ends. Tight ends the most fun position to do. Get into the basketball converts, et cetera, et cetera. We may never have another one like Taylor Thompson coming over from the defensive side of the ball. But Matt, when I go on this topic, give me a name or two, either one of your favorite stashes or a name or two that somebody you're excited to get to see, hopefully a few more touches, or you hope there's the week 17 players like Willie Parker was, second Willie Parker reference in this show, where week 17 can be that week that portends bigger things in the future. So while we're thinking about fantasy championships and we're thinking about how things went, we're also getting little clues. Who's someone you might be looking for clues from, or somebody that you're trying to get on your roster as we're in this stage of the season?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that maybe, some of the guys that come to mind, I'd like to see if a guy like Jordan Lasley will get a little bit more playing time. I'm interested in seeing whether he's been working hard at his game, because he's a talented enough guy to be able to get on the field. I'd like to see how Dante Foreman looks if he gets back on the field, to see how that goes. More playing time for, I know we've already seen Richie James, but I'd still like to see a little bit more out of him and see if they would use him in a little bit more versatile ways. I think also, this is a weird tangential thing, but I look at the Jaguars and I think you passed up on Teddy Bridgewater. You didn't draft a quarterback. You could have had Lamar Jackson. Imagine Lamar Jackson and Leonard Fournette running option. I mean, that's like a match made in heaven dream type of situation. And they didn't do that. And then you had Bridgewater. And now I'm sitting here thinking, there's this guy who's probably like trying to keep himself out of jail, who could be probably had for next to nothing, who will be begging to be on an NFL roster, and Chad Kelly, who, if everything could kind of work out all right, he might be a pretty cool fit in Jacksonville. If if Grandpa Coughlin goes, you know what, we're going to give this kid another chance, that would be kind of interesting. So I've kind of been hanging on to Chad Kelly in a lot of leagues, just until I hear he's going to the Canadian Football League. Yeah. And then once he does that, then I'm dropping him pretty much in any team that in that format. I'm trying to think, the last of it is a Jaleel Scott, the right. Ravens.
Both of those, they're both on IR, by the way. Both Lasley and Scott are on IR, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But they're still, so is Chris Warren. So IR doesn't necessarily mean, so is Corey Grant. IR doesn't mean that they're dead to us. It just means that it might be easier to stash them on your roster at the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for me, I think, at the end of the year, in terms of players that we're looking at right now, I'm not really, David Morgan out with Minnesota. Like, if he gets a chance to play, I think David Morgan could be a fantastic tight end in this league. And I think that if he ends up on another team, we may look at him and go, wow, where did he come from? Because he's one of the best blockers in the league, and he's got extraordinary quickness and can catch. Robert Tonyan, he continues to kind of sneak in there in the Packers lineup. And, we see Jimmy Graham is definitely slowing down at this stage. So I think Tonyan as a receiver has definitely shown some. It's just a matter of whether Aaron Rodgers is going to trust him enough. And then I think, those are some of the players that really come to mind right away for me, because the rest, at this stage, a lot of the guys I already mentioned are on IR.
Yeah. And well, look, I'm glad you brought up David Morgan, because another way to think about this is situation. And the situation here is I think Kyle Rudolph isn't probably worth what his paycheck is going to be. Maybe he'll restructure, maybe he won't. But there's Kyle Rudolph's spot that could be David Morgan. And they've been drafting. They have Michael Pruitt, who's on another team now. I can't remember exactly where. They also have Tyler Conklin. And Conklin, and you and I have talked about Conklin before, I think, on the show, that he's a pure receiving tight end. And he, kind of like Josh Adams, is a player that if you watched him last year going into the draft, doing your draft prep and thought, well, there's something there, but I'm not sure, you might not have seen his best work because he was playing hurt or playing not at 100% last year. And you go back farther and you see a player that shows his true ceiling. So I think whether it's Morgan or Conklin, thinking about getting a share of a spot. And on that note, let's talk a little bit about, we didn't ask Dr. Gene, I don't think people are necessarily debating whether to play Isaiah Crowell this week. He's got that toe injury. He's missed a couple practices. They're talking about him not playing this week. That means we could see Elijah Maguire and Trenton Cannon, and hopefully, knock on wood, D'Angelo Henderson maybe get called up from the practice squad. Looking ahead to next year where Bilal Powell, I mean, he'll hopefully find work somewhere. I don't know if he's going to be with the Jets. Isaiah Crowell, okay, maybe he'll still be there and still be the lead back. Maybe they'll sign Le'Veon Bell. But just looking at those three backs and thinking of this last few weeks as an audition, anybody excite you from the Jets backfield?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, I think Elijah Maguire is exactly that. He's kind of a Bilal Powell, but maybe a little bit less, even though I think some people think it's going to be more. I think it's one of those psychological situations where we see the player who we should have liked a little bit more maybe. And now that another player comes around who's kind of now we do like that player more, but he's not quite as good. So I think that they still are in line for another back. Cannon to me is a kick return specialist who can catch the ball, who's fast. I don't think necessarily he's I don't think he's going to challenge for a lot of playing time. I think he's kind of more of a guy that seduces you with his speed. So I am excited. I mean, I can tell you some other teams I'm excited about, players, with a little more thought here. I mean, I would love to see John Kelly and Justin Davis for the Rams get playing time. I mean, Kelly for sure.
I feel like Kelly's one of those guys that you want to get a step ahead. You pick up. I think Mike Tagliere and I talked about this on the couch this week. That this is your step ahead pickup. This is your $1 pickup, like you were talking about. Because I have a feeling that when John Kelly shows what he can do, even if it's just a couple of snaps, touches, Malcolm Brown's a restricted free agent next year, and maybe they only give Malcolm Brown an original round tender, which is undrafted free agent, and let's see if someone will give him more money because they've got their guy. They've got their number two, not just a number two, but you can see the way that Arizona is so excited about Chase Edmonds that they want to find ways to use him. I think that's how the Rams should be looking at John Kelly.
And I think that's true, but and I think you've mentioned enough about Kelly that we can move on and talk about Davis, which is interesting as kind of a very under the radar player to see where he winds up. And he may not do anything, but what I found most intriguing about him is that he's incredibly quick, and he gained 20 pounds between USC and his time with the Rams last year, and he stuck around that roster enough that they talked about really John Kelly, Justin Davis being that early went down. That's what they talked about this summer. McVay said that because Davis is a really good slashing runner who hits a hole hard. And I remember watching him and thinking, if he could gain 20 pounds, I know that doesn't seem like he could, but you saw his frame and it was like he was tall and thin. He looked more like a wide receiver. If he could gain that weight and maintain that burst, he could be something else because he has great movement. And sure enough, he did. And he stuck around that roster enough. They've got a really talented group there. So that's one that kind of fascinates me a fair bit in terms of what happens here. There are some guys that just get kind of pigeonholed. And I think, a guy who got pigeonholed is Mike Thomas with the Rams, who's a special teams guy. I would love to see them maybe give him a little bit more of a look as a receiver if things kind of went in a way where they could just kind of play. They're not playing for anything, at the end of the season. If that's the case, then I think that could be kind of interesting there. I wish Byron Pringle was healthy because I'd like to see a little bit more of him. He's a Chiefs wide receiver, but Darrell Williams would have been it might be kind of fun to see just because he's got really good footwork and he's quicker than you think for a really big back. And that's a really good guy that would be worthwhile to check out. And then really, I mean, beyond that, I would love to see just more extended time for a guy like Jordan Wilkins, just because I think he's a better back than Marlon Mack. And that's somebody that we haven't really seen a ton for, from that perspective. But yeah, those are guys that really do come to mind for me.
And I'll toss out one more IR name, which is one that you put on our radar and one that you and I talked about back in February or March. Boston Scott in New Orleans, and Mark Ingram's going to be a free agent next year. Again, be looking ahead, folks. Use over the cap and look at these contract situations and try to understand where there's a spot opening up and see who at least has a chance to inherit that spot. That's why go ahead.
Or you can look at the RSP post draft. You get that kind of contract analysis and that, back in May, that you can kind of look back at that and see where contracts are going to be up within the next year and 2 years.
Yeah, and I think Jacob Hollister is an interesting guy, just because we've already heard that Rob Gronkowski and the Patriots may try to move on from him this offseason, and they may try to move on from him next offseason. With this Dante Foreman talk, I just want to toss a name out there, because one of the things that I subscribe to whenever I'm putting together these lists, Matt, is when a team uses a very valuable 53-man roster spot on a running back that they do not make active. So this is not a running back who can contribute on special teams. This is a running back that they're almost using a 53-man roster spot, like a practice squad spot. No matter what I personally thought of the running back or wide receiver or tight end or even quarterback, third quarterback start to become interesting, guys like Taysom Hill and Tim Boyle and stuff like that. I take notice, at least to go back. So when Miami tried to slip Buddy Howell through to their practice squad, Houston pounced. And I know Lamar Miller's discovered the fountain of youth, and we'll see about Dante Foreman, and Alfred Blue is just a guy. And then there's still Buddy Howell. You have anything from the RSP file on Buddy Howell?
Actually watch Buddy Howell as a rookie, so I really don't know anything about him at all.
Yeah, I know he's a bigger back. I think he compared himself to Le'Veon Bell, which doesn't seem that much, a little more of a slasher. But I'm watching that. I'm watching Indianapolis, that's spending a roster spot on Jonathan Williams right now. Tennessee is one of the scratches this week is Jeremy McNichols. So it's very interesting to me. And also I took notice when Minnesota spent 2 roster spots on Mike Boone and Rock Thomas. Now Thomas is on the practice squad and Boone is below. One other player I want to ask you about on this list, Ameer Abdullah.
Yeah.
I mean, can we tell a story that Detroit never used him correctly, and somebody is going to try, maybe New England, try to use him in a way more befitting his talents? Is it possible that we haven't heard the most from Ameer Abdullah yet?
It's possible, and it's because the talent is definitely there. I think the issue with Ameer Abdullah was a couple of things. One is that his line was horrible for most of his career. And when you have a horrible line and you don't really have an offense that is, has good rapport and doesn't sync up very well, your running game is usually going to struggle. On top of that, he had things that were his own fault. He fumbled the ball too much. Then he fumbled the ball too much and he got dinged up. And when he had to come back on the field, he probably had what Reggie Bush had when Reggie Bush started his career, which was trying to do too much, trying to take the world on his shoulders. And when you come back from injury and you're supposed to be the man and that job feels a little bit threatened, you start to push and press a little bit more and you try to make bigger plays. And he was guilty of trying to make 1 or 2 extra cuts and cutbacks or bounces in creases where he should have just taken what was there. And as a result of that, he became a much more tentative runner than what you saw at Nebraska. And so I think he still has the skills within him
if he can regain that confidence. The tough part is that these guys aren't that much removed from high school and college, and that maturity level to really kind of get things under control when you face difficult times often occurs in your late 20s. Well, by that time in the NFL, your career's over if you haven't gotten it together early enough. So this is going to be a big test for Abdullah, but I like the fact that the Vikings have kind of kept him at the end of the roster, and he may get a chance to emerge there because I like the fact that the team that did keep him at the end of their roster was a division team, because a division team would know best what they've scouted and looked at with him. And I'm sure they looked and they go, oh yeah, that's a good player. We just need to see whether he can come back to being the good player he was, because the difference between, when you have a talent of Ameer Abdullah's speed, burst, change of direction ability, catching, ability and balance, the difference between he and Dalvin Cook is actually pretty darn small. The problem is that margin for error in terms of confidence level and consistency, that's why he's fourth on the depth chart instead of challenging for playing time. And it's that small of a margin when you're talking about talent in a performance-oriented league, is that if you lose that edge in your performance, you can quickly be out of the league. We're talking about Steve Slayton. I want to talk about this a little bit, if you don't mind. In this week's roundtable, I posed a question about Philip Lindsay. And, as I was writing about Philip Lindsay, it reminded me a lot of Steve Slayton, who was a rookie of the year with Houston and, had a huge, huge year. But by 2 years later, he was pretty much out of the league, and some of that wasn't that his talent was exposed. Some of it was that he lost confidence. And I think that, you look at somebody like Philip Lindsay, and everybody was shocked about, whether or not, other than, hearing the drum beats later in the summer, but pre-draft, a lot of people weren't really going off about Lindsay saying this is going to be a running back 1, or even a running back 3. He might be a kick returner who might make some big plays occasionally. And I think that, we have to remember that with these players, that while we often look at them 1 year and say they're great, that sometimes you need 2 to 3 years to see how a player really is. And also a player can lose what they had. And I think Abdullah is an example of that.
As the world turns, and instead of going for 5 touchdowns, it looks like Derrick Henry was trying to get, I have the sound muted, Dion Lewis a touchdown. I don't know. And I actually had to start Dion Lewis on some of those James Conner, and Kareem Hunt, and Melvin Gordon teams. But it's not about my team. It's about your team out there, folks. And hopefully in your week 14 playoff matchups, you're Derrick Henry and not the guy trying to tackle Derrick Henry on his way to the end zone. And it's fun. It's fun to have you on this journey with us as Matt and I go head to head this week, as I try to get in his head and get him to start. What, this week? So just so people know, and this is the league where I went wide receiver. I don't even know how many wide receivers. So of course the rest of my team is like rubbing 2 sticks together, and I lost AJ Green on this team. But just so people know, for the record, as we go a little bit overtime here, as it stands right now, I do have one entity going. It is the Titans defense. I played the Titans defense over the Bears defense, as we do massive, as I explained with Cecil and those penalties. So right now I'm actually getting 18 out of the Titans defense, but if they can get some yards and points, Jacksonville, in garbage time, like that wonderful G.D. Westbrook touchdown, I could lose some of those points. So I've got my 2 quarterbacks, and I am starting 2 quarterbacks, are Jeff Driscoll and Eli Manning, because I went minimal.
Wow.
I went minimal quarterback. I think Alex Smith was one of my quarterbacks. I also have Nick Mullins on the bench. I actually have Kody Kessler on the bench too, and he would have been worth 17 points so far. Maybe I should have put Kody Kessler in. I've got Lamar Miller and Jalen Samuels with Jeff Wilson on the bench, which I'm gonna have to think about. But the core of my team: Antonio Brown, Brandon Cooks, T.Y. Hilton. That made me sad. And Julian Edelman, and then T.Y. Hilton. So I'm sorry, Mark Andrews as my tight end. I love Andrews' matchup. I love the rapport that he's shown. Tyler Lockett.
I bid on him first, and I didn't get him, so you got him over me.
Tyler Lockett. So Tyler Lockett and Jeff Wilson are the two players that I have to debate. Like, would one of them be better than Driscoll or Manning? Would one of them be better than Samuels in Wilson's case? But you've got Patrick Mahomes. Look, do you want to talk about your lineup this week so everybody can hear about the Matt Waldman All Stars?
Well, we're laughing because because we both have a bunch of all-stars. Actually, really, it's funny. I mean, I do have Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, so that always helps. So, for me, it's been I went cheap on running backs and thought I had David Johnson early, but I ended up with Adrian Peterson in like the 10th round. So it's, David Johnson and Adrian Peterson, but I'm wondering if I should insert Justin Jackson. And then there's always kind of like Frank Gore, who's kind of like sitting there and tempting me. And I've Doug Martin, who I could kind of consider too. And we can start up to 4 running backs in this league. So there's that. But then, of course, I have Godwin, DJ Moore, Dante Pettis, and Robert Woods. And Woods was an original guy. Godwin was an original guy. Moore was a guy I picked up when Jason Wood dropped him. And Dante Pettis is a guy I picked up last week, but didn't start him when he had that 34-point out, basically that just rampage that he had through, the Seattle defense. So I'm starting him this week against Denver. But I don't know whether I'm going to start Dante Pettis or DJ Moore or Justin Jackson. I had Case Keenum, but Case Keenum's getting on my bench. I just don't trust anything that's going to happen there. Jordan Reed was the reason why I was looking at Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
But against the Giants, I'm hopeful. So I'm starting Jordan Reed. And I have the Cowboys defense and the Rams defense. And I usually start the Rams, but with them playing Chicago and Cowboys playing Philadelphia and the way the Cowboys have played lately, I'm rolling with the Cowboys this week. In honor of my father-in-law, who's a big Cowboys fan, though I'm not. But that's kind of my decisions with this. This was a good team to start the year, and then it's kind of gone up and down ever since with injuries, even though David Johnson now is doing well, and the rest of the team has been kind of up and down.
Well, and thank you, everybody, for indulging us, and as you indulge us every week in many ways. But I think going over this, I think to just show people like we are really in the thick of it, just as much as we are producing all this content for you and trying to pass on what we're learning. We're also wrestling with our teams, and I like how you reference other people, and when that gets into your head, sometimes when you start players in honor of people, and there's nothing wrong with sentiment, there's nothing wrong with emotion, there's nothing wrong with doing things because it's fun or doing things for a reason that isn't necessarily based on maximizing your chances of winning, because this is a release. It's a release for us to get to do this. It's hopefully a release for you to get to share this journey with us and have this as an outlet from some of the more dreadful or heavy things that go on in our life. Thank you for giving us that opportunity. And thank you, folks, for continuing to encourage us. And we will be back as you continue to encourage us on Sunday mornings. Thanks to Dr. Gene. Cecil Lammy out in Philadelphia for the Army-Navy game. Travel safe, and everyone out there, travel safe through life. And we will see you here back again Sunday morning.